what's the treatment process that goes into treating the sewage to become drinkable water?
Right, well first of all, you have to treat the sewage itself, the raw sewage, and that's normally done through conventional processes called activated sludge, which is the way conventional or normal sewage is treated to what we call a secondary standard, and that's usually before it's discharged. What then happens after that is that you'll have what we call a tertiary treatment stage, where the water normally would be filtered through some sort of filtration process with a sand filter, possibly with chemicals added to flocculate fine particles in the effluent, and also to remove things like phosphate. So that's sort of how we would treat the sewage, and at the end of that, that's what would normally be called tertiary treated sewage. It'd be, in the parlance of the industry, Class A effluent. Then what would happen, or what's happening in Queensland, is they take that effluent and they pre-treat it again with chemical flocculation filtration process to remove again as much of the fine particles that are there. That then flows through to what they call a microfiltration membrane. There's two membrane steps. The microfiltration membrane is basically a polymeric membrane, and the water is pushed through this membrane. Because we'll call them holes, they're sort of tiny little channels that the water goes through are about 0.1 microns, very tiny, about much smaller than the width of a human hair. That basically filters out all the other very fine particles, generally most of the bacteria and organisms like protozoan organisms. So there's very few actual solid particles get through that filter, and that operates at pretty low pressure, doesn't take much energy. But that's a pre-treatment to the next step, which is where they put the water through what we call a reverse osmosis membrane. Now this is again another polymeric membrane, but it is very much tighter. There's not really holes in it, the water just sort of seeps through. Is very, you're talking atomic sized channels that the water goes through. Basically what happens is virtually everything, even the dissolved material, the salts, any organics, materials that are in the water, don't go through the membrane. It takes a lot of pressure to push the water through this membrane because it's so tight, but what comes out of that membrane is approaching distilled water.